Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Rick Janelle. I'm the minister for the Bellevue Church of Christ outside Omaha, Nebraska. And we're doing a live Bible study tonight. I wanted to, we've been talking about different kinds of ways to study the Bible and ways to make the Bible come alive for you. And so I wanted to just take a chapter of the Bible tonight and let us practice a little bit with our informed imagination. Let me begin by telling you what I mean by the informed imagination. Um, the Bible uses the word meditation. David said that he meditated on God's word and that made him more insightful than all of his teachers. And I've told you before that I believe that the word meditation is better probably used by people in the U.S. today by the word imagination. Imagination is when you sit and think about something. You imagine, you mull it over in your head, which is exactly what the Bible means by the whole idea of meditation. But to mull something over in your head, you first have to have something in your head. You first have to have some data to chew on, to crunch on, to process. And so the informed imagination is a thing is a type of Bible study where you begin with the text. You study the text, you read the text to see just what it says. Take your time to read it one sentence at a time. Think about it, chew on it a little bit. As you come across things that maybe you may not be familiar with, you might want to grab a Bible dictionary and look up a word or look up an idea in a word Bible study. You might want to look how that same word is used in other places, especially in other places where the same author is using them in maybe slightly different ways. And so let's just take a little time. Let's do that tonight with Mark chapter 4. Let's begin by doing what I always try to do, and I always try to look at the context of a thing. So if I was going to study the fourth chapter of Mark, the first thing I would do is I would want to know how the third chapter ended and how the fifth chapter begins. And in my mind, I would think of those as kind of bookmarks to hold the two ends of the text that I wanted to study. And so if you look back at Mark chapter 3, you find that Jesus healed a man with a paralyzed hand. He had a multitude come to him. He called 12 disciples. He taught them about a house divided, which our families and our churches and our nation should go back and restudy. He talked about true relationships. And what happens at the end of this third chapter is the two groups of people that should have encouraged and helped him the most as the crowds were growing and as the demands on his time were increasing to the point that he was not being able to eat, he was not being able to sleep. People wouldn't leave him alone. They wouldn't let him rest. They wouldn't give him a chance to take a break because, like usually is the case in ministry or in social work or in counseling or different kinds of jobs where you're face to face with people a lot. The truth is nobody wants a lot, but there's a lot of people that want something. And you add a lot of those little people wanting a little bit together and you wind up with days and nights that just never seem to end sometimes. And that's true for a doctor on call in a hospital as well. There's other professions that are the same. It's not just guys like Jesus that are teaching scriptures, but that's what was happening in his ministry was that his fame had grown to the point that people were coming in droves to listen to him. And it was affecting his life. It was affecting his time with his friends. It was affecting the people that he was staying with. And there were two groups that came that should have been the two groups to help him the most. One group was this. Let's see, where is it? Chapter 3. Look back at verse 20. He went home and a crowd gathered again so that he wasn't even able to eat. When his family heard this, they set out to restrain him because they said he's out of his mind. So there's one group. One group that should have been encouraging and helpful for Jesus is I lost my train of thought. One group of people that should have encouraged and helped Jesus was his family, but they didn't. They thought that he was crazy and they needed to take him back home to keep from embarrassing himself and the family further. The second group of people that should have encouraged and helped him was a Jewish delegation of people from Jerusalem who came to see what all the hubbub was about, why so many people were coming to listen to this young teacher of the Bible. And as leaders of God's people in the city of Jerusalem, where the temple was, they too should have been very encouraging and very helpful of this young man who was attracting and drawing people in to hear about the kingdom of God. But they didn't. Look at verse 21. The scribes who had come down from Jerusalem said, he has Beelzebul in him. He drives out demons by the ruler of demons. So his family thinks he's crazy, and the rulers, the scholars from Jerusalem, think that he's demon possessed. And so there's no encouragement with either of these, and Jesus has to deal with these things. He winds up telling people, look, my true family's right here, the ones that are here sitting listening to me. And that's how that chapter ends, is with Jesus being overworked, underrested, underfed, and not encouraged by his family or by religious leaders that should have been behind him. So that's how that chapter ends. We'll look at how chapter 5 begins a little bit later. So chapter 4, after he's been discouraged by his family and discouraged by religious leaders that should have known better and should have been encouraging to him, it says in verse 1, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to read through the first few verses. We're going to look at verses 1 through 20, and we're going to stop every so often and just ask a few questions. And this is what you need to do in your own Bible study as well. You need to open your Bible. You need to read slowly and deliberately. Maybe you need to read it out loud so that you can actually hear the words. But let's show you how I do it. In chapter 4, verse 1, again, he began to teach by the sea, and a very large crowd gathered around him. Okay, so we've got the third chapter ending with a large crowd, leading to his family disappointing him and religious leaders disappointing him. He's now down by the sea, and another large crowd comes around him. The last large crowds didn't let him eat. They didn't let him sleep. They interrupted his family time, his time with relaxation with friends, the functioning of families where he was staying. And so, if I were him, I would not be really excited about this crowd gathering. I used to think as a young minister that one of the best things in the world would be to constantly want people to hear the gospel. And I have to admit to you that the first time I went overseas to a country where they had never seen many Americans, they had not heard much about the Bible, where everybody knew someone who wanted to meet and touch an American, who wanted to talk to you and ask you a question and spend a little bit of time with you. And for a few days that's nice, but after a while it really, really wears thin. When the church in Pennsylvania sent me on sabbatical about 10 years ago, we went to China, and I took my youngest son, Caleb, with me. And one of the guys who traveled with me, Chip Hartzell, brought his grandson, and the two boys were about the same age, and we all kind of went in separate directions for a couple of weeks, and we got back together, and I got to talking to the boys and found out that they had a little bit different time than they thought they would, because when they first started, they were Americans. They were young. They were the age of the high school and college kids they were talking to, and so everybody, especially the girls, would come in droves, 10, 12, 15 girls, and they would want to touch their skin and touch their hair and ask them questions. And they were really excited until about, 2 or 3 days into it, I think I remember hearing them say. And they said that it started dawning on them that all these girls, all these people that were fawning over them, all these people that wanted their attention, there were like 8 or 10 questions that they all asked. They all asked the same questions. How do you like China? Do you like Chinese food? Was the flight long? Have people treated you nicely? What's your favorite TV show? It was very surface, very non-deep. And when they tried to talk to them about things that were a little more deep, sometimes they had to use a translator because all they knew was surface English. Other times, they didn't really want to know what the boys were talking about. They didn't want to know the boys. They wanted the fame of being associated with the boys. And I wonder if some of that wasn't happening here with Jesus, as once again, there's a large crowd gathering around him. And I wonder if he's not thinking in his mind, is this just another one of those deals where people want more and more and more from me. They're not going to let me eat. They're not going to let me sleep. Is this there's going to be another chance for my family to be embarrassed and to want to take me into custody, or the authorities, the religious authorities, um, going to make it even harder on me. Uh, of course, Mark doesn't say that here, but those are the questions that I would have in my mind if I was Jesus. And so, you see what I've done there? I've looked at the text, I've seen the passages of the text, and I've started to ask myself questions that lets my imagination run free a little bit. I'm not trying to add to the Bible. I'm not trying to tell you that my musings and mental ramblings are correct or scripture. Um, this is how I interact with the Bible. It's how the Bible comes alive for me, and I suggest that you do the same thing too. Not to add to it, not to tell other people they've got to believe the same thing you do or up with the same imagination you do. But the questions are very, very helpful. So this large crowd gathered to him, verse 1. So he got into a boat on the sea and sat down while the whole crowd was on the shore facing the sea. Now, I've read in some commentaries that, they say maybe one of the reasons he did this was because sound travels better over water than it does on land. And the crowd was so large that he was able to back up a little bit and be able to project his voice better. And maybe that had something to do with it. But if you look back in chapter 3, I can't remember which verse it is, but in chapter 3, he actually made provision for this. He saw the crowds. He saw how that crowds could really almost become dangerous. Back when I was a teenager, there were several rock concerts where the doors to the building were not unlocked, and crowds were eager to get in. And there were stories where the crowds would push so much that the people in the front would get trapped against that door. And there were actually some people that were killed and badly hurt and trampled in those ways. And maybe that was what was happening with some of these crowds. Maybe some of these crowds were pushing and so demanding that Jesus do something for them now. Heal my brother now. Give me food now. I want money now. I want your attention now. And if enough of them were pushing to do that, chapter 3 says that he made provision and said, I may need a boat. And sure enough, here we find in verse 1 that he got into a boat on the sea, and he sat down. And so maybe part of it was to project his voice. But I bet because of the power of crowds and because of the amount of stupidity that people in crowds can have, people in crowds will do and say stupid things that they would never do on their own. Just look at what's going on with some of the rioting in the country around our cities around our country these past several weeks and months. It's always crowds of people. There's always one or two hotheads that stirs the crowd up, and the crowd takes on a life of its own, and they become this seething wave of air and a mass of water that just rolls over everything in its path. Maybe Jesus and his disciples were starting to experience some of these things from the size of these crowds. Listen, crowds are not always a good thing. Many times we as Christians think that, the more successful our church is, the more crowded our churches will be. Not necessarily. If the crowds are the wrong kinds of people, if they're there for the wrong kinds of things, if they're promoting the wrong kinds of behaviors and attitudes among the crowd, maybe the particular church would be better off if they went to church someplace else. And if you get a bunch of those people together at one time, you could see where Jesus would have to take some of these precautions. And so, while the whole crowd was on the shore facing the sea, Jesus was in a boat, and he sat down. And this is something you find through the Gospels. When Jesus goes to talk seriously, he sits down. He doesn't stand up and wave his hands. He doesn't tell the microphone guy to turn the amplifier up or the speakers up. And it's kind of the way that rabbis and influential teachers did in ancient times. They would walk with their students, and when they got ready to say something important, they would sit down. And when they would sit down, if the group of people they were teaching was small enough, they would sit in a close huddle together. If they were large enough, a good number of the people would actually have to stand around the one that's sitting to talk. And so I don't know if that's once again why Jesus is doing this, but what he did was he got into a boat, he sat down, and there was a whole crowd on the shore facing the sea. Maybe Jesus just didn't want to get his clothes wet. Maybe he was concerned about being pushed too deep into the water. Maybe he was concerned about people pushing too hard to reach him and that someone might get hurt or trampled. Who knows exactly? But all these things are possibilities in his mind. They would have been in mind if I were there. Verse 2, he taught them many things in parables, and in his teaching he said to them. Now stop here for just a minute. One of the things that you need to notice about the book of Mark and other books, but the book of Mark especially, is that every so often you find phrases like this. Verse 2 says, he taught them many things in parables. Well, what things did he teach them? Mark doesn't say what the many things were. We have many of Jesus' parables. We don't have all of Jesus' parables. Don't convince yourself that if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll know everything about every minute of every day that Jesus lived on this planet. Scholars disagree about exactly how many days of Jesus' life we have stories for, but the general consensus is maybe 30, 35. He was here for 3 years. There are many things, John says, that he did that are not written here. John says if all the things Jesus did were written, he uses hyperbole here, or excess. He says, I don't imagine the world could contain all the books. Same thing here. He taught them many things in parables. Now, fortunately, we get to peek into some of these parables, but wouldn't it have been great to know what some of those other parables were? And then on the other hand, would I have taken the time to listen and paid any attention? Would you? There were people who came who crowded around him. And what were those people like? Well, verse 3, he says, listen. And this is the way Jesus often starts the way he teaches crowds. He'll shout. He'll say, listen. Sometimes what I do when I get ready to start a Bible class and if people are glad to see each other and they're talking and they're drinking coffee and they're laughing and joking and it's time to get started, many times I'll take my hands and I'll clap. Okay, let's get started. Everybody take their seats. What Jesus did was he said, listen. And he expected people to listen. And I wonder if everybody did, though. In fact, I would guess that the great majority of the people in these crowds didn't listen. Do you know why? Because of the parable that he gets ready to tell these people. So he's talking to the crowd. He's sitting in a boat. He says, listen, consider the sower who went out to sow. Maybe where they were sitting, there might have even been a farmer on a nearby hill planting seeds, walking by. Wouldn't that be a great moment on a movie or in a DVD to have Jesus talking about it, the sower to all this crowd and have a guy in the background doing exactly what Jesus was talking about? I have no idea if that's true or not, but it's a great mental image, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was the way it happened. He says, listen, consider the sower who went out to sow. As he sowed, this occurred. Some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground when it didn't have much soil. It sprang up right away, since it didn't have much deep soil. When the sun came up, it was scorched, and since it didn't have a root, it withered. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns came up and choked it, and it didn't produce a crop. Still, others fell on good ground and produced a crop that increased 30, 60, 100 times what was sown. Then he said, anyone who has ears to hear should listen. And he was done, according to Mark. Now, engage your imagination with me for just a little bit. Notice how Mark has him starting and beginning this section with the thing called bookmarks. You find this in the ministry of Jesus a lot, and some of the writings of Paul, but especially in the ministry of Jesus. When they write about the ministry of Jesus, many times they use a literary thing that's referred to as bookends. Bookends are similar words, similar phrases, similar settings that become like the two pieces of bread with the meat in the middle. And the meat being the story that we're used to, but there's a form to it. There's an organization to it. God is a God, not a God of confusion. He's a God of orderliness and of discipline. He takes chaos and makes beauty and order. And so it's not surprising that the books that he inspired people to write would also have literary order to them. And so here's the order. Verse 3 starts with the word listen. Verse 9 ends with the word, he who has ears to hear should listen. And between those two pieces of bread called listen, there's a story about a sower. And we might really call this a parable or a story about the seed, because it's more about the seed and the hearer than it is about the sower. It just so happens an aspect of the story is somebody goes out and throws some seed around. But look at what Jesus says. Um, he says, verse 4, as he sowed, this occurred. Some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. Now, can you stop right there and imagine that happening? Can you imagine a movie scene in your head where that's true? Where this guy has a bag full of seed. See, there's where the informed imagination comes. They didn't have tractors with hoppers that they seeded the ground. They didn't have the whirlybird spreaders with the plastic hopper like we use fertilizer and seed today. The way they planted seed was they had like a burlap bag in an arm, and they would reach in, and as they walked, they would throw handfuls in the air and let the wind kind of scatter it. And that was how they planted it. So can you imagine? Can you in your head see as somebody is walking to the field to do this? He reaches into his bag and some kind of spills over the edge of the bag or falls out of his hand as he's getting close to the edge of the field, and it falls on the path, not where he's prepared the ground, not where the weeds have been taken out, not where the ground has been softened up. It's on the path, and the path is hard and it's dry and it's been walked on by people's feet. Maybe it's cracked in the sun. And as that seed fell on the ground, what happened? Well, according to the story that Jesus tells, birds came and ate it up. Isn't that what birds will do? What do birds do in your backyard if you put bird seed out? When we bought our house in Pennsylvania, there were the lady had several bird feeders in their backyard. And Tammy and I argued back and forth for a couple of weeks. Those are your bird feeders. No, those are your bird feeders. We finally didn't put any bird feeders out. And one of our neighbors said something to me. They said, "Oh, I'm so glad you didn't put those bird feeders back out because all those birds do is poop on my car." Well, that's what birds do, right? They eat seeds and they poop on people's car. So you can imagine as this guy's walking along this path, some of that feed falls out of his hand, falls out of his bag, it falls on the ground, and what's the bird going to do? Hey, I got a snack. I got some free food here, and I can imagine a bird or a group of birds falling along behind him, and as the seed fell on that hard ground, it didn't hide in the clods of the dirt. The sharp-eyed bird could see it, peck at it, it's gone. How about verse 5? Other seed fell on rocky ground. Well, in rocky ground, maybe some of it fell underneath the rocks or in the cracks between the rocks. But it says this was rocky ground that didn't have much soil. And it sprang up right away. Well, of course, yeah, because there's an energy in that seed that Jesus is going to talk about later in the chapter. There's an energy in that seed that explodes when it comes to life. And if it can't explode pushing roots down, the explosion pushes greenery up with not enough root down to support and anchor the greenery. And so it springs up right away, but since it didn't have soil, when the sun came out, it was scorched because it didn't have a root, it withered. It didn't have the proper watering system into the dirt to support the amount of greenery that it grew. Verse 7, other seed fell among thorns. And the thorns came up and choked it, and it didn't produce a crop. You ever had a garden that got completely taken over by different kinds of weeds because you let it go too long? Maybe you planted a couple of tomato plants and you went on vacation, you came back and your tomato plants were overrun by some kind of a vine or some kind of a weed. That's exactly what happened here to this in this story. It got choked out, it didn't produce a crop. Verse 8, still others fell on the ground, on good ground, and produced a crop that increased 30, 60, and 100 times what was sown. Then he said, anyone who has ears to hear should listen. And then Jesus stopped speaking. Now, one of the strengths and one of the weaknesses of Jesus' parables, and somebody says, well, how can you talk about it? Anything Jesus did have a weakness? There's lots of things that Jesus did that had a weakness. Going back to heaven and leaving the future of the church in the hands of the 12 disciples and others that he had trained for 3 years was a risky thing. Many of you I know, and many of you know me. It was a risky thing to entrust the job of being a minister to a young guy like me years ago. And it was a very risky thing for you, for God to entrust you with children, grandchildren, neighbors, jobs, whatever, houses, cars that he's blessed you with. Why is it risky? Because we tend to not handle things well. We tend to make mistakes. And so these parables are risky as well. And here's the reason. Because if the listener does not engage with the word of Jesus, then the word becomes meaningless and has no effect on them. And according to this story, 3 out of 4 times, the message of Jesus is a failure. It's not a failure because of the seed. It's not a failure because of Jesus. It's a failure because of the ground that the seed fell on. And that's exactly true today. I'm always shocked and amazed at people that fill these 4 types of people that Jesus talked about, because those kind of people are still here today. And today in my line of work, I don't plant corn. I plant Bible teaching. And it's always interesting to see when you invite someone to a class, when you try to engage with someone with biblical teaching, there's initially a huge divide. There are those that are interested and those that aren't. And we're really seeing this now in our churches as the COVID-19 quarantine is easing some. We're really seeing people who, there's a difference between the people who long to be at church with other Christians and who long to study God's Word, and those who they're either more afraid of other things or they're more drawn by other things. It's one thing for someone to say, I'm so afraid of getting the virus that I never leave my house. It's another thing for someone to say, well, I go to the grocery store, I go and play golf, I'll go clothes shopping, and I'll go to the park, but I'm afraid to go to church because I don't want to get the virus. See, there's a dividing there. And for those people, the seed never makes it to them. The seed never makes it to their heart. The seed never even gets it to them. For them, the story would extend backwards in time to where the seed stays in the bag, and there's no seed there because they aren't there. They don't get it. But out of the ones who come, there's still these ratios that Jesus talked about here. There's footpath Christians. There's stony ground Christians. There's thorny ground Christians. And one of the things about, for example, stony ground Christians, since they don't have roots, since they don't have deep depth, they get all excited and then they disappear. They get all excited and they disappear. They get all excited and they disappear. And the only way you can keep people like that who have no root and who don't push roots into deep, good soil, the only way you can keep them active in a church is, as a church leader, you've constantly got to be pumping them up. It's like riding a bicycle that's got a slow leak, or playing basketball with a ball that has a slow leak. You have to constantly keep pumping it up, pumping it up, pumping it up. And if it ever gets to the point where you're so tired and you've got so many people you're trying to pump up that you go too long between their pump ups, they disappear and they blame you and say, because you don't love me, I don't come, because you don't really care. Other people don't really care, so I'm just not going to go to that church anymore. You see that happen. You see that happen. And so what Jesus is doing as he describes this sower and these seeds is he's really describing the crowds from chapter 3 and chapter 4, and it's going to be in chapter 5 as well. And he's telling his disciples some things. He's telling these people that are listening to him some things. He's saying, you need to listen to what I'm telling you, because I'm talking about you. And he didn't name people's names and say, you're a footpath follower and you're a stony ground person. He just said, this is what they're like. You listen. You decide for yourself. You engage. You think. You imagine. You dream. You ask yourself, what if? And be honest about it. And that's exactly the way God's Word has got to be studied today. We've got to engage with the text. We've got to engage with other people. We've got to think. We've got to teach, and we've got to learn, and then we've got to imagine, and then we've got to mull, and we've got to share these thoughts, and we've got to share our imaginations, and then go back and learn some more from the questions that we ask. Why? Because that's what good soil does. Good soil is soil that's been turned over and tilled by the plow. It's been tested by the farm agent. It's been fertilized. maybe had some some weed inhibitor put on it. Um, when they plant it, they come back a little while later. They cultivate it. They water it. They do all different kinds of things to that field. That's what needs to go on in our minds. That's what goes on in our hearts and our souls with this interaction with God's Word. And if we don't do that, if there's no interaction, then what's going on in the field of our mind, the field of our heart it's laying fallow. It's not being plowed. It's not being bush hogged. It's not being harrowed. It's not being planted. It's not being harvested. It's not doing anything. It's just not there. Now, once we start to engage, we can still mess up. And there's at least 2 or 3 ways that he talks about here that we can still mess up and still miss the point, still understand. And so now all of a sudden, does it make sense that this meat sandwich of this parable of the sower and the seed, does it make sense that it would have the bread on the inside and outside that says, listen, pay attention. Anyone who has ears to hear should listen. You should pay attention to what I'm saying. And the interesting thing is, as people left from this conversation, they had no idea what he was talking about. No idea what he was talking about. And the story kind of skips between verse 9 and verse 10 some kind of time. It doesn't really tell us what happened as the crowd dispersed. But it does say that sometime later, verse 10, when he was alone with the 12, those who were around him asked him about the parables. Now see, here's what Jesus is looking for. Jesus is looking for people that will come to him in those days physically, these days in prayer, who will come to him with their questions and with their doubts and with their fears and cast their cares on him because he cares for you, the Bible says. That's what Jesus is looking for. He's looking for people who will interact with him. And so just as he used parables that he didn't tell what they meant and said, okay, let's see what people do. Let's see who asked me about this. The ones who ask me about this, I need to spend a little more time with. The ones who don't ask me, they're not really interested. They just want me to feed them or to heal them or to do something for them. Let's see what happens here. That's what's happening here. And you can see it if you think with the eye of your imagination. So he answered them, verse 11, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those outside everything comes in parables, so that, and now he quotes an Old Testament prophet, that they may look and not perceive, that they may listen and not understand. Otherwise, they might turn back and be forgiven. We don't have time tonight to talk about the thing that people today call the unforgivable sin, but here's one of the places that Jesus mentions that there's some things that go on in the spiritual realm that cause people to not be forgiven and for it to not be possible for them to be forgiven. The point is, it begins with whether we engage with God and if we engage with his word and we engage with his son or not. Do we care enough to ask questions? Do we care enough to read it seriously? Do we care enough to get angry when it tells us something we don't want to hear? Do we care enough to see a promise of God and think, well, God didn't keep that promise to me? Do we care enough to go back to him and say, what do you mean? What happened here? God longs for us to interact with him from the very beginning of the creation of Adam and Eve. He created human beings to interact with him. He wanted companionship himself. Companionship with a being that had the choice and the freedom and the ability to choose not to, but still wanted to. That's the most wonderful thing in the world about being chosen by an animal, where you become that animal's person. When I was a boy in middle school, I raised chickens, and we sold the eggs. And I used the money to go to movies and to get candy and different kinds of things. And one day I went out to feed the chickens, and I noticed that there was this little bitty calico cat that was curled up in the hay. And about the time I went in there, one of my sisters came in and saw it, and of course she went wild. Oh, kitty, 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 and she ran to the cat. And the cat was a wild cat, and the cat kind of hissed at her and spat at her and ran and put her claws and climbed up the wall. And so I just waited till my sister went back to whatever she was doing, and I went back to, taking care of the feed, taking care of the hay, talking softly to this cat, and all of a sudden this cat calms down and comes back down from the rafter that it had climbed up to, and gets into the hay and gets to looking at me. So I go into the house and I get some of Mom's tuna fish. She didn't know I did that, but I took a can of tuna fish and opened it up, and it smelled like cat food to me. So I took it out to this cat. And I took it out there, and I took the can, and I left it, and the cat had to kind of check it out and kind of look at me. And when I reached a little closer, it would back away. And when I left the food, it would come a little closer, and it would smell a little bit, and then it would look. Smell a little bit, and it would lick, and then it would look. And after a little while, it would eat a little bit of that fish. And if I moved or if I coughed, the cat would maybe jump back a little bit. But the longer it ate, the calmer it got, the calmer I talked, the more I interacted with it. Before long, I could reach over and scratch its head, and it was the most pitiful thing in the world. It was covered in fleas and ticks. It was just the most mangy-looking old cat. But all of a sudden, this cat had the fish in its belly, and it started purring, and it closed its eyes, and it leaned its head into my hand. And from that point on, that cat lived in our chicken shed and would run from every other human that came in there except me. Isn't that a cool story? I don't even like cats. But I like that cat. Why? Because that cat chose me. And what went on with the choosing of me and the me choosing of it? Well, there's this interaction back and forth. There's the contrast between my screaming sister and me being a calm-voiced person. There's the interaction over the food. There's the interaction over, how loudly do I talk, and do I scratch its ears or not, and do I come back and feed it again sometime? There's the purring. There's the closing of the eye. There's the leaning of the head into the hand. All these things. See how your imagination is replaying this inside your head? This is a parable. It's a parable just like the one of the seeds and the sower. We as people have been given the right to choose. Do we want to serve God? Do we not want to serve God? Do we believe in Him? Do we not believe in Him? Do we believe that He exists? Do we believe that He's a good God? Do we believe that He rewards those who genuinely seek Him? See, there's that interaction. This cat sought me. I sought it. The two of us met. But it took both of us, right? It took both of us. My sister sought the cat too, but the cat, that's not what I want. You have to decide, is God what you want or not? Are His ways what you want or not? Do you want to live in a world that are ruled by His rules and His ways or not? Do you want your family to be formed and to function by those ways or not? Do you want your own thoughts and your own life to be bound in by the guardrails of God's word and God's ways or not? Well, the only way you can make that decision is to interact. Or you can just blindly say from the beginning, I'm done, I'm out. If He'll give me what I want, then I'll give Him a token prayer once in a while. And if it's a big enough thing, then I'll agree to come to church on Sunday and be bored so I can go home and do something else. Isn't that what some people do? And so that's what the story of the thorns and the stony ground, the seed, the sower. But imagine, how did it look? How did it feel? And you can spend hours with this story. You can be driving on a long-distance trip. You can be doing a monotonous job at work. You can be trying to fall asleep at night, and you can be rolled through your head. I thought about what it felt like to be Jesus, but I wonder what it felt like to be a mother at the shore that day with their kids. And just imagine it. What was it like to be the guy that owned the boat, that prepared the boat for Jesus and let Jesus use His boat for a pulpit? See, the Bible doesn't tell us about those kind of things, but our imagination causes us to interact with God and interact with His story so that when we finally come to the meat of the sandwich, we're mentally prepared, and it has been our habit to interact back and forth. And so God is happy when we say, why does He say to listen all the time? I got ears, I hear fine, just fine. I got good hearing. Well, maybe He's not talking about the hearing of your ears. And we have to start imagining and imagining and imagining. The Bible calls that meditation. David said if you study God's word with that in mind, with the way to improve yourself and to change yourself when you find that you need to, that it will make you wise. It'll make you smarter than the people that have taught you. Why? Because God's Spirit will work with you. And His Spirit in you resonates with the word of the Spirit, the sword of the Spirit. And that's how you need to study the Bible. Okay, that was what I had for tonight. I had some other thoughts from later in the chapter, but we've been at this for about 30 or 40 minutes now. Let's look over here and see who joined us. Hey, Marilyn. You said you got your grandkids with you tonight, huh? That's great. That's great. So you guys are being Mimi and Papa tonight. Let's see who else here is here. Hey, Marvin. Glad you could join us from Pennsylvania. Let's see who else. Jonna Sue, you're with us again. Good to see you. It's good to see you Sunday. Let's see. Charlotte Timmerman's with us. Who else? Oh, my cousin Sylvia. I'm glad you joined us. Good you be with us, Phil. So I'm not sure who all else joined us, but this video will be up, and it will be live, or it won't be live, but the recording of it will be up. If you found it helpful and you think someone else might ought to be interested in seeing this, please pass it on to them. So have a great week. Lord willing, we'll do this again next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.